Russell's mama said that she knew that he would come this far, both figuratively and literally. But as much as he loved his mother, he knew that she was lying. He barely graduated high school, and now he was sitting, more like floating, in the belly of a massive spacecraft, orbiting the moon for God's sake. How the hell did I get here? I should be working in a scrapyard located in some one-horse town in the Panhandle, not flying to the moon. Russell wasn't some crazed Air Force test pilot or overeducated degree-holding scientist turned astronaut. He was a welder with just a diploma from a rundown trade school in Mobile, Alabama. That was half the reason he was a part of this mission, to show that you didn't need to be classically educated to be a part of this bold new sci-fi future. The other half was his occupation as a welder. For you see, Antares wasn't a spacecraft made of some super advanced carbon composite nonsense. It was a spacecraft made of good old-fashioned stainless steel, the same type of steel found in almost every building constructed back on Earth, and a fair few on the moon as well. Russell had worked with the stuff for his entire career, and he was sure as hell wanted to put his skills to work on the moon, whether it be repairing Antares if she broke for whatever reason, or constructing new buildings across the desolate lunar surface. Russell liked to think he was prepared for whatever came at him. But first, Antares needed to land. Anxiety washed over Russell as Antares' rocket engines lit up, taking the massive craft out of orbit and down towards the surface. Antares had managed to successfully land on the lunar surface a couple of dozen times before, and who knows how many times her sister ships had managed to perform the same maneuver. Not to mention that the entire landing procedure was completely automated. Yet, there was always some possibility that something could go wrong. Maybe the radar would break, meaning that they would have no idea how high up they were. Maybe one of the landing engines would refuse to ignite. Maybe the guidance computer would take over the ship, killing them all. He wanted to touch down softly on the landing pad, not go crashing into the surface at a frightening speed. Perhaps if worst came to worst, the crater it would make would be named after their not-so-little ship. He tried to comfort himself with this possibility. Yeah, Antares Crater. Sounds like a nice name. As the minutes wore on, Russell's anxiety only grew more. It was only aided by a little speaker that was calling out Antares' altitude and velocity. The numbers were going ominously down. Something must be wrong, he felt. This mission had gone on for far too long without something going wrong. He finally just zoned out, as the little voice coming through the speaker became nothing more than background noise. As the little voice got quieter, the engines became less and less audible. Finally, they shut off. He began to panic, not realizing that Antares had come to a complete stop. Suddenly, Russell snapped back to reality, trying to decipher what happened. Oh god, he thought. They've stopped working. I'm fucked. Soon, the little voice came back through the speaker. The woman's tone was one of excitement. Not the tone Russell would think somebody would have when they knew that one of their engine's turbopumps had just ruptured. Antares has successfully landed. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Conrad Base. A strange feeling began to wash over Russell as he took in the gravity of the situation. A million things began to race through his head, aside from the obvious relief that they hadn't become the moon's newest crater. The biggest thing was sheer lack of movement. Everything felt still, bizarrely still, especially after moving for all those days. During the previous days, Russell would look out the great big windows on the observation deck to get his frame of reference, the Earth. Every hour would get smaller, and every hour the moon would get bigger, a constant reminder that Antares and everyone aboard was moving across the black void called space. For the landing, he had to be seated in his little compartment, which had no window to peep out of. The only sensation he felt during the entire landing ordeal was the movement of the craft, which made it a lot more terrifying. Russell quickly unbuckled from his seat, exited his little compartment, and clambered down to the observation deck. It was the first time he had experienced gravity of any sort for the past week. It felt refreshing, even if it was only 1/6 of the gravity felt back on Earth. Despite this, the sensation he felt was oddly strange, yet familiar at the same time. There were a few dozen other people all loitering near the window, all with differing occupations. Most were some kind of scientist or engineer, a few were tourists, but all were unlucky enough not to be assigned a window seat. He was able to push his way to the front of the small crowd, and what he saw was breathtaking. It was almost entirely desolate, colorless. The light of the sun reflected off the gunmetal powder that covered every inch of the surface. Off in the distance, he could see small hills rising barely up above the horizon. The surface was pockmarked with craters forming from impacts going a million years. Some parts of the surface were just flat entirely. This was the ocean of storms, a land formed from volcanic eruptions that occurred when the moon was still young, and it would be Russell's home for at least the next year. Out of the corner of Russell's eye was Conrad Base itself. A collection of buildings stood at the center, with a sea of solar panels radiating out from the core. There was a small road that led out from the center to the pad at which this Antares had landed on. A small bus had made its way to greet the arrival of the newest visitors to this massive base. What was once terror, then amazement, now turned to excitement as Russell was eager to get off the stupid craft and get working. He knew that they would give him a few days to adjust to lunar life, but he wanted to say hell with it. It didn't come a quarter of a million miles just to sit around and do nothing. Only one thought passed through his mind now, one that perfectly captured his thoughts about what he wanted to accomplish at the Earth's nearest neighbor. Well, let's get to work, shall we?